Billionaire invited the black cleaning lady as a joke. She arrived like a diva, and everyone was in absolute shock when they found out who she really was. The main hall of the Blackwood mansion in Beverly Hills exploded with malicious laughter when Victoria Sterling descended the marble staircase wearing a dress that cost more than the annual salary of most of the people present. It wasn't laughter of admiration. It was pure cruel mockery. "Look who decided to show up," Richard Blackwood whispered to his guests, raising his glass of Dom Perignon champagne. Our dear cleaning lady Victoria was 35 years old and never imagined she would one day step foot in that ballroom as a guest, even if it was a joke. For 2 years she had cleaned every inch of that mansion, always invisible, always silent, watching those rich people treat each other with rehearsed falsehoods while treating her like furniture. The invitation had arrived 3 days earlier, delivered with a cruel smile she knew all too well. "Charity gala on Saturday," Richard said, handing her the gold envelope. "Dress code maximum elegance. You surely have something suitable in your wardrobe, don't you?" The laughter of his friends echoed through the hallway. It was an obvious trap, an attempt to humiliate her publicly, to put her in her place in front of California high society. Richard had even invited social reporters to document what he called an educational moment. "Let's make a bet," Richard said to his wife, Helena, as Victoria vacuumed the day before. $100,000. She doesn't have the nerve to show up. And if she does, she'll be the entertainment for the evening. Helena laughed maliciously. "You're terrible, Richard. The poor thing will probably show up in something borrowed and feel so out of place that she'll leave within 15 minutes. But Richard Blackwood didn't know two fundamental things about Victoria Temps. First, she had grown up in halls like that long before she had to clean them to survive. Second, some storms don't destroy. They just teach you how to dance in the rain. As she walked through the hall under the mocking glances, Victoria kept her posture straight and her gaze serene, like someone carrying secrets that could turn that world upside down. His steps were sure, calculated, as if each movement were part of a long-rehearsed choreography. "My God, she really came," whispered Patricia Weston, wife of a senator, to her friend. "And look how she's dressed. Where did she get that dress?" "She probably rented it and will pay for it in 10 installments, replied Vivian Chambers, daughter of an oil magnate, trying to disguise her own insecurity with cruelty. How pathetic. What none of those people knew was that Victoria hadn't bought, borrowed, or rented that dress. She had simply gone back into her own past to retrieve it. A past that Richard would have done anything to erase if he had known it existed. Richard approached her, his chest puffed out with arrogance, surrounded by his billionaire friends. His confidence was sky high. After all, he had orchestrated this as a public display of power and social control. "Victoria, what a pleasant surprise. I never doubted you'd come. After all, when a person like you receives an invitation to an event like this." "A person like me?" Victoria repeated, her calm voice cutting through the air like sharp silk. "Go on, Richard. Finish your sentence." For a microscopic moment, something in her tone made Richard hesitate. There was a firmness there that didn't match the submissive woman he knew from the halls of the mansion, but arrogance quickly took over again. "Well, you know, someone who doesn't normally frequent this kind of environment. You must be feeling quite intimidated by all this elegance." Victoria smiled. Not a submissive or nervous smile, but something dangerously serene that made some nearby guests stop laughing instinctively. "Intimidated," she repeated softly, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made Richard take a step back without realizing it. "No, Richard, I'm feeling exactly where I've always belonged." The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough for the atmosphere of the party to change completely. There was something about the way Victoria spoke, the way she moved, the way she occupied the space that defied all expectations those people had about who she should be. Richard cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. "Well, I hope you enjoy the evening. I'm sure it will be educational for you." "Oh, I'm sure it will be educational for all of us," Victoria replied, her gaze slowly sweeping over the group of guests as if cataloging each face for future use. If you're enjoying this story of twists and justice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what those privileged people didn't know was that Victoria carried with her a secret so explosive that it would turn that night of planned humiliation into the greatest lesson on prejudice and underestimating people that Beverly Hills had ever witnessed. Richard was having more fun than he had imagined. Victoria hadn't run away in embarrassment as he had expected. She remained there with that strangely confident posture that was beginning to bother him in an inexplicable way. "Everyone, Richard announced loudly, tapping a silver spoon against his crystal glass to get the attention of all the guests. "I'd like to introduce our special guest tonight, Victoria, our dedicated cleaning lady." Laughter echoed through the hall like cruel waves. Cell phone flashes began to flash as socialites took photos to post on their social media accounts with sarcastic captions. "Richard," Helena murmured beside him, finding concern. "Don't you think you're being a little cruel?" "Cruel?" Richard laughed loudly. "I'm giving her the opportunity of a lifetime. When else would someone like her ever get the chance to attend an event like this?" Victoria stood motionless in the center of the room, all eyes fixed on her. But instead of the embarrassment they expected to see, there was something disconcerting about her expression, a serenity that seemed to come from someone who had weathered far worse storms. Patricia Weston approached with her group of friends, all wearing poisonous smiles. "Victoria, dear, tell me, how long did it take you to choose that dress? It must have been so challenging to find something suitable." "Actually," Victoria replied with a calmness that made Patricia hesitate, "this dress has a very special history. It belonged to my mother." "Her mother?" Vivian Chambers laughed nasally. "And where did her mother get a dress like that?" "At some fancy thrift store." Victoria smiled, but there was something dangerous in that smile. "My mother wore this dress the last time she was in a ballroom like this. That was 20 years ago when she was still Victoria Temps Blackwood." The silence that followed was deafening. Some people stopped talking, realizing that something important was being said. Richard, who had been laughing with his close friends, turned slowly. "What did you say?" "Thames Blackwood." Victoria repeated, her voice cutting through the air like a sharp blade. "It's funny how some people choose to conveniently forget their own family history." Richard's face began to pale. Helena instinctively grabbed her husband's arm, sensing that something was terribly wrong. "You're delirious," Richard said, but his voice came out less firm than he intended. "I don't know what game you're playing, but this isn't a game, Richard." Victoria took a step toward him, and several guests instinctively backed away. "It's history. Our history. The history you tried to erase when you decided it was more convenient to pretend that certain people in our family never existed." The cell phone cameras continued to record, but now for a completely different reason. Whispers began to spread through the room like wildfire. Helena pulled Richard by the arm. "What is she talking about?" "She's lying," Richard replied, but his hands were shaking slightly. "She's a deranged employee trying to get attention." Victoria reached into her small purse and pulled out an object that made several guests gasp. It was a ring, not just any ring, but the traditional Blackwood family engagement ring, engraved with a family crest and featuring the distinctive blue sapphire that had been passed down for generations. "This ring," Victoria said, holding it up for all to see, "was given to my mother by her father, Henry Blackwood. My grandfather, the man you told your children, died without an heir." Richard was now visibly shaken. "Where did you get this? How dare you steal? Steal!" Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Richard, you can't steal something that is rightfully yours by birthright." Patricia Weston, who had been watching open-mouthed, whispered to her friend, "My God, do you think she's telling the truth?" "Impossible," Vivian murmured, but her voice no longer sounded so confident. "Richard would have told us if he had a cousin." Victoria heard the whisper and turned to them. "Cousin? No, dear. I'm not Richard's cousin." She paused dramatically, looking directly at Richard. "I'm his half-sister." The room exploded in murmurs and muffled exclamations. Richard looked as if he had been struck by lightning. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, but his voice cracked. "My father would never. You're making this up. Henry Blackwood had an affair with my mother, Isabella. For 5 years, Victoria continued relentlessly. She was the family's piano teacher. When she found out she was pregnant with me, your father promised to take care of us, and he kept his promise until he died." Helena now had one hand over her mouth, staring between Victoria and Richard as if watching a car crash in slow motion. "You, Victoria," said, pointing directly at Richard, "decided it would be easier to pretend we never existed. You cut off our allowance, sold the house your father bought for my mother, and left us in absolute poverty. I had no obligation to," Richard began. But Victoria interrupted him. "You had no obligation to take care of your father's family. Interesting philosophy, considering you inherited 100% of a fortune that should have been divided between us." The weight of Victoria's words was slowly sinking into the minds of the guests. Several began to move away from Richard, as if physical proximity could contaminate them with a scandal. Prove it, Richard said desperately. Anyone can make up a story and come up with a ring. Victoria smiled again, and this time there was something predatory in her expression. Oh, Richard, do you really think I came here without proof? She took her phone and motioned to someone near the entrance. They can come in now. Each new humiliation of Richard only fueled something inside Victoria that he couldn't understand. A silent force that grew in direct proportion to the injustice he tried to impose. What those privileged people didn't know was that every act of contempt was writing her own sentence. And Victoria had spent 20 years learning exactly how to collect every penny of a debt that transcended money. 3 people entered the hall at that moment that would change the lives of everyone present forever. The first was Diane Morrison, Beverly Hills' most respected investigative journalist. The second was David Chun, an attorney specializing in inheritance law. The third made Richard Blackwood stagger as if he had been punched in the stomach. Dr. Hamilton, Helena murmured, recognizing the family's private physician. What are you doing here? Dr. Hamilton, who had treated Henry Blackwood during the last years of his life, walked to the center of the room. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. 20 years ago, I was forced to sign a falsified death certificate. Henry Blackwood did not die of natural causes. He was slowly poisoned with arsenic over a period of months. The hall erupted in muffled cries. Diane Morrison raised her hand. Please keep your phones away. This is an official confession being recorded for legal purposes. Richard was visibly desperate, sweating. You're crazy, Hamilton. My father died of heart problems. Your father found out about the money you'd been embezzling from the company for years. Dr. Hamilton continued relentlessly. He had changed his will to include Victoria and was about to report you to the police when he began showing strange symptoms. Victoria remained silent, tears of relief in her eyes. Finally, after 20 years, someone was telling the truth. David Chun opened his briefcase and took out an official document. This blood sample was tested last week by an independent laboratory. The arsenic levels were fatal. You're making this up. Richard shouted, but his voice was completely uncontrolled. It's a conspiracy to ruin me. Diane Morrison stepped forward. Mr. Blackwood, I have transcripts of 5 conversations you had with Dr. Hamilton between 2003 and 2004, where you threatened to ruin him professionally. Victoria finally spoke, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. Richard, you didn't just kill our father. You stole 20 years of my life. I didn't kill anyone. Richard pointed his finger in all directions. You're all lying. Then explain this, said Victoria, connecting her phone to the mansion sound system. A recording began to play. Richard's voice was unmistakable. Hamilton, you're going to keep your mouth shut about anything strange you found in the old man's blood. If you open your mouth, I guarantee you'll never work as a doctor again. And as for that woman and her bastard daughter, they'll have to fend for themselves. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the people who had defended Richard now shunned him as if he were radioactive. Helena stared at her husband in horror. Richard, you really did this? 20 years? Victoria screamed, her composure breaking momentarily. 20 years of cleaning my own father's blood off the hands of his killer. Victoria took a deep breath and regained her deadly calm. You want to know how I got all this evidence? I didn't come to work here by accident. I applied specifically for this position. I spent 2 years preparing, gaining access to the house, collecting evidence. Richard tried one last desperate gambit. Even if all that is true, it doesn't change anything. The inheritance was distributed years ago. David Chun smiled for the first time. Actually, Mr. Blackwood, when there is evidence of murder, all assets can be redistributed according to the original will, and we have a copy of Henry Blackwood's actual will. Victoria approached Richard, who was leaning against the wall like a cornered animal. Do you know what my biggest mistake was, Richard? It was believing that you would change on your own. Please, Richard whispered. All arrogance evaporated. Helena, the children, this will destroy our family. You destroyed our family the moment you chose money over justice. Richard collapsed into an armchair, completely defeated. His transformation from arrogant millionaire to exposed criminal had taken less than 2 hours. Victoria looked at Richard one last time. He was broken. But that was only the beginning. What Richard didn't realize, and would discover in the worst possible way in the next few hours, was that Victoria had spent years gathering evidence, not only about her father's death, but about all the financial crimes, blackmail, and corruption he had committed over the decades, weaving a web of justice so meticulous that his downfall would be spectacularly complete. The next 2 hours turned the most exclusive gala in Beverly Hills into the biggest scandal California high society had ever witnessed live. Richard was now sitting on the floor of the ballroom, his back against the wall, watching his entire life unravel in real time. Diane Morrison had connected her laptop to the mansion's projection system, and documents, photos, and recordings appeared on the giant screen for all the guests to see. This is a bank transfer of $200,000 from Richard Blackwood's personal account to Dr. Hamilton. Dated 3 days after Henry Blackwood's death, Diane narrated as the image appeared on the screen. The memo on the transfer reads, "Silence is golden." Helena was now on the other side of the room, as far away from her husband as possible, crying silently as she processed 20 years of lies. "And this," Diane continued, "is a recording of Richard talking to his accountant about how to hide the company's embezzlement." Richard's voice echoed through the room. "I need you to make the numbers dance. If Agnon finds out I've taken out $20 million over the last 5 years, I'm ruined. Blame it on market fluctuations, expansion costs, whatever." Patricia Weston whispered to her friend, "My God. He stole from his own company." Victoria remained in the center of the room, calm as the eye of a hurricane, watching each revelation systematically destroy the life of the man who had murdered her father. David Chun approached with a new folder. "Mr. Blackwood, in addition to the criminal charges, I must inform you that Miss Thames is filing a $50 million civil suit against you for wrongful death and misappropriation of inheritance." $50 million? Richard looked up with glazed eyes. "I don't have $50 million. "No," Victoria said softly. "But your company is worth $120 million, and half of her has always been mine by right." Diane Morrison continued the devastating presentation. "We also have evidence that Richard blackmailed at least 5 local politicians, bribed 3 judges, and diverted charity funds to personal accounts." Each new revelation drew gasps of horror from the guests. People who had arrived as Richard's friends now moved away as if he were radioactive. "Victoria," Richard said in a broken voice, "please, you got what you wanted. Stop this." Victoria stepped forward and knelt in front of him, looking directly into his eyes. "Richard, you killed our father. You stole my family, my inheritance, my dignity. You made me clean his blood off your hands for 2 years. I can make it up to you," he whispered desperately. "There is no making up for 20 years of injustice," Victoria replied with haunting calm. "But there are consequences." Helena's phone rang. It was one of their children calling from college. "Mom, is everything okay? Are they saying on the internet that Dad is a murderer?" Helena looked at Richard with utter disgust. "His own children are finding out what kind of monster you are on social media." Richard tried to stand, but his legs gave way. "Helena, please." "The children." "No!" Helena screamed, silencing the entire room. "You don't mention our children. You've shamed them forever." Dr. Hamilton approached Victoria. "Miss Temps, I must inform you that I have already contacted the police. Richard will be arrested later today for murder." Victoria asked, "Murder, fraud, blackmail, tax evasion? He will spend the rest of his life in prison." Victoria turned to the guests who watched her with a mixture of admiration and terror. "I want everyone to understand one thing. I didn't do this for revenge. I did this for justice. I didn't do this for revenge. I did this for justice. For all the people who have been trampled on by men like Richard Blackwood." Patricia Weston approached hesitantly. "Victoria, we're so sorry. We didn't know. You knew I was treated like a subhuman." Victoria replied firmly. "You laughed. You participated. The only difference is that now you know I have more money than you." The sound of sirens began to echo from outside. The police had arrived. Richard looked at Victoria one last time. "You've destroyed my life." "No," Victoria said, standing up with all her dignity. "You destroyed your own life the moment you chose evil. I just made sure the truth came out." As the police officers entered to arrest Richard, Victoria walked out onto the balcony. Outside, dozens of reporters were waiting. TV cameras, photographers, journalists. The story had already spread. Helena approached her on the balcony. "Victoria, I really didn't know anything." "I know," Victoria said gently. "You were also a victim of his. What's going to happen now?" Victoria looked out at the city sparkling below. "Now, Helena, justice will finally be served, and maybe Beverly Hills will learn that class has nothing to do with a bank account." As Richard was led away in handcuffs by the police, passing through the same hall where he had tried to humiliate her hours earlier, Victoria felt something she hadn't felt in 20 years' peace. What Richard would discover in the next few hours in jail was that Victoria had planned every detail not only of his downfall, but also of the complete rebuilding of her own life, and that the Blackwood Empire now had a new heir who would make sure to use that power to protect exactly the kind of people he used to trample on. 6 months later, Victoria Temps Blackwood sat in Richard's former office, now completely renovated. The walls that once displayed trophies of arrogance now displayed certificates from social projects and photos of employees promoted from entry-level positions to executive positions. Richard had been sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The charges included murder, corporate fraud, blackmail, and tax evasion. His personal fortune was completely confiscated to cover compensation to the victims. Victoria was just one of many people he had harmed over the years. "Miss Temps Blackwood," said Amanda, her new executive assistant who had previously worked as a cleaner in the building. "Forbes magazine is here for the interview about the company's transformation." Victoria smiled. In 6 months, she had increased the company's profits by 40%, simply by treating employees like human beings. Fair wages, promotions based on actual merit, and a respectful work environment had created a level of productivity that Richard had never achieved with his toxic leadership. Helena had divorced immediately and moved out of state with her children. Before she left, she sought out Victoria to apologize in person. "You could have destroyed us completely, but you chose to protect my children. I will never forget your generosity." "Children don't pay for their parents' sins," Victoria had replied. "They deserve the chance to be better people than he was." Dr. Hamilton now worked as a medical consultant for the company, offering free care to all employees. "I never thought I'd have the courage to do the right thing," he told Victoria during a meeting. "You taught me that it's never too late to find our dignity." Patricia Weston and Vivian Chambers had tried to reach out to Victoria in the weeks following the scandal, but she kept them at a polite distance. "You laughed at me when you saw me as inferior. Now you want my friendship because you found out about my bank account. That says everything about you." Victoria's story had gone viral worldwide. She received invitations to speak at universities about leadership and social justice, but she preferred to focus on the real work. "I don't want to be famous for suffering," she explained in a rare interview. "I want to be known for what I built afterward." The company now sponsored scholarships for employees' children, a microcredit program for entrepreneurs in underserved communities, and had created the largest domestic violence support fund in California. On a quiet afternoon, Victoria received a letter from prison. It was from Richard. "Victoria, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know you taught me that the person I became was a monster. I spend every day trying to understand how I turned into someone capable of killing his own father for money. His children asked about you on their last visit. They want to meet the aunt who protected the family when their father failed." Victoria kept the letter without replying. Forgiveness was a personal journey, but justice had already been served. During the interview with Forbes, the journalist asked, "Some people say your revenge was too cruel. What do you say to that?" "Revenge would have been to do to him what he did to me," Victoria replied calmly. "Justice is ensuring that he pays for the crimes he committed, and that other people don't suffer what I suffered. There's a fundamental difference between the two. And what advice would you give to people facing similar injustices?" Victoria looked out the window, watching employees having lunch in the company garden that now offered them respect and dignity. "The best revenge is not to destroy those who have hurt you. It is to build something so great that the injustice you suffered becomes only the first chapter in a story of triumph." That night, Victoria returned home, no longer to the small apartment where she had nurtured her dreams of justice, but to a comfortable house where she had adopted 2 orphan children who, like her, needed a second chance at life. As she helped the girls with their homework, she thought of the father she had never really known, but whose blood ran through her veins. Henry Blackwood would be proud to see that his daughter not only recovered what was stolen from her, but turned a company built on exploitation into a symbol of opportunity and dignity. Victoria's real victory wasn't dethroning Richard. It was proving that when you build power based on justice rather than fear, that power multiplies and benefits everyone around you. Richard tried to humiliate a cleaning lady and ended up discovering that he had underestimated an AYS. More importantly, he discovered that dignity cannot be bought, inherited, or stolen. It is earned through the choices we make when no one is looking. If this story of justice touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that good always wins when you have the right strategy, and that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone has chosen to ignore.